Joining me now is Congressman Grothman, Glenn Grothman, 6th District in Wisconsin. Remember, he was just with us in April at the Waukesha Expo Center. We had a full house, didn't we? And he came and spoke and visited with some of you guys. It was great. Congressman, welcome back. You're the 6th District in Wisconsin, correct?
Correct. Along Lake Michigan, places like Sheboygan or Manitowoc, yes.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so you're back in the district right now. You're in Wisconsin tonight?
Correct.
How are things going in Wisconsin before we get to the big, beautiful bill? How are things in Wisconsin? Because we have a lot of your voters, a lot of your supporters listening to this program.
Good. Well, we're very discerning here in the 6th Congressional District. And when I'm on Brandon House, I always catch people the next couple of days, so I'm on Brandon House. So feel very informed voters.
Thank you, indeed. So we share something in common. They're your voters and my listeners. So that's a pretty good, partnership there, I think. By the way, remind our audience how many years you've been representing that great district.
This is my 11th year.
Wow, good for you. Good for you. All right, what big issues, before we get to the big, beautiful bill, what big issues are you working on right now? Or did any big issues that you were personally working on get passed or rolled into the big, beautiful bill?
We'll give you an exclusive. We are working on 2 projects right now, to a certain extent with the assent of the Trump administration. One of those we've talked before on this show about the degree to which our government penalizes people for getting married. These are the big welfare programs initiated under Lyndon Johnson, whether you're talking about low-income housing, food stamps, earned income tax credit, general internal revenue code, Medicaid programs, all of them. If you get married, if you're a single person benefiting by these programs and get married, you can easily wind up losing $25,000 or $30,000. And that's why, in the 1960s and the 1950s, you would have, maybe 4% of the population, 4% of the children born in this country did not have a mother and father at home. Now you're over 40%. Why is that? It's because the federal government punishes people who get married.
Wow.
I think a committee or commission set up by President Trump to look at this problem. I'm glad he's going to be engaged on it.
Good. Excellent. Well, we need more moms and dads getting married, raising kids inside marriage, because as you just pointed out, the studies show that's how kids flourish and do the best. The big, beautiful bill, 900 pages. What about it do you like? What about it do you not like?
I think the big benefit is we're finally going to be putting enough money into enforcing immigration. And not only going to stop illegal immigration, we're going to begin to deport more people who've come here illegally. You got to remember the Biden administration they allowed a little under 10 million people here without really, I think, an appropriate asylum claim in a 4-year period. That's bad for America, obviously creating a housing shortage, changing America, and that you have people who came here, first of all, broke the law just to come here, which is a problem, and even more, may not have the appropriate viewpoint towards the role of government that we need to keep our country free. So I think you're going to begin to see these people deported. I'll remind your listeners that every year in this country, about 850,000 people are sworn in as new citizens. Every year, we issue about 500,000 work permits for people to come here. So it's not like it's impossible to come here. We're very generous with allowing people to come here legally. And if you look at the number of people sworn in as citizens, you're talking over 800,000. Back when I was a child in the 60s, it was more like 110, 120,000. So we're swearing in legally about 6 times what we used to about 60 years ago. And we've been very generous, but it's time we enforce these laws. We've got to give the government the money necessary to enforce these laws, or our country will be permanently changed.
I talked to someone today that has a friend that's a headhunter. And apparently the government is now cracking down on a certain type of document that illegals had, and the government's not accepting this document anymore. That, I guess moving them out of the country. And the individual that knows this headhunter told me today that the headhunter told him that just in the last few days now, they're getting all of these companies calling and saying, we need 30 employees, we need 40 employees, we need 60 employees, 60 people, we need them now. What are you hearing across the country or in Wisconsin? Are you hearing that there is a, whether it's poultry or meat packing plants or whatever it might be, what are you hearing as far as businesses trying to fill slots? Are you hearing anything?
The economy is strong. I think it's become noticeably stronger under President Trump. And we're in a situation in which, now is the time to look for a job. And to a certain extent, that's a reflection of the strong economy. To a certain extent, it's a reflection of the fact that maybe some of these companies had people here illegally, or we are not now accepting documentation they used to accept, and businesses are having to backfill those positions. But again, I'll remind your listeners, if we begin to allow everybody who comes here who just doesn't break the law, why is not that going to continue, right? If we're going to have immigration laws in this country, we have to be able to say that if you come here illegally, you'll be deported. Otherwise, people will begin to come here, whether they come here on a tourist visa and overstay, whether they come here, I was in California a few years ago, whether they come here on boats in the Pacific Ocean, whatever, you cannot enforce your laws if you say, once you cross the Rio Grande, we're not going to deport you. So we're going to continue down that path. If we wind up needing more people, we can increase the number of work visas that are issued by the United States to make sure we're getting the best, most law-abiding people. But we cannot just say 10 million people came here under Biden, we're going to keep those people here. That's just not no way to run an immigration system.
Exactly. No way to run an immigration system. You put out a statement here. Look at this, folks. The American people gave us a mandate after 4 years of failure under President Biden to revive prosperity in our country. The very first sentence says that the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill is a historic victory for Americans as we've avoided the largest tax hike in our nation's history. Now, I know there are some things in the Big Beautiful Bill that some of us don't like, but this one here I think is huge because small businesses, medium-sized businesses, they cannot afford the largest tax hike in American history. So this is a big deal.
Right. Your listeners remember we had tax cuts in 2017. Those tax cuts aimed the middle class budget. I got complaints on tax cuts in 2017. The people who complained were the wealthy, okay, because we got rid of the tax deduction for taxes on state and local taxes. Got rid of that deduction. And the primary people who benefited by that deduction were the very rich. So we had a tax cut aimed at the middle class in 2017. If we got rid of that tax cut, it's the middle class who would have borne the brunt of the tax increase. So we had to extend those tax cuts, which is a good thing. You can see President Trump added other tax cuts on for people making less than $100,000. Got rid of the tax on overtime, got rid of the tax on tips, both aimed at middle class people. Obviously, big wealthy CEOs, they're making more than $100,000 in the first place. Secondly, they're not the type of people who get tips. They're not the type of people working hourly on overtime.
Let's talk about the border. I've got a video here of a guy that is tracking what's going on with the border up in Canada. I guess we hear a lot of talk about the border, obviously in South Mexico, America border. Here he is talking about Canada, because I know this is a big hot topic for you. And this is, of course, getting closer to your neck of the woods in Wisconsin. Here we go. Listen to this.
Hey guys, it's your friend Anthony Aguero for the American Border Story, and we currently find ourselves on the U.S. northern border And right behind me, as you can see, is Canada. We've been investigating up and down in this rural area, and we've determined that there are still people crossing into the country illegally. We're going to bring you guys more updates, and a full report is our day one of being up here on the Canadian border. Stay tuned for more. Your friend Anthony Agüero, the American Border Story. Thank you guys for your support.
All right, and we when one of my documentaries that came out, I think in 2019, we played a clip from a national security expert that said, be careful, guys. Canada is going to be like an aircraft carrier from which Islamic terrorists will launch terrorist attacks in America. It'll be like an aircraft carrier launching attacks. How concerned are you, or what are you hearing as we're getting reports, not just from him, but other people, that a lot of attention is being paid on the southern border, but not the northern border?
Well, I think the Trump administration will pay more attention to the northern border. He's right, particularly after our involvement in helping Israel out in the Middle East. There is the danger that hostile countries, primarily Iran, but maybe also groups based in Afghanistan, may try to begin some terrorist attacks, which is another reason why it's so important we put the additional money in this bill towards enforcing our border.
I don't know if you're getting any briefings. I know you get national security briefings that maybe you cannot talk about. But we're hearing from former CIA folks like Sarah Adams and other folks that are, some of these people have been in the intelligence arena. Now they're out, but they're continuing to track and monitor and study. And there seems to be growing chatter that Al-Qaeda is planning a terrorist attack in the U.S. and particularly targeting airlines and using what these experts are describing as invisible bombs based on the way they're able to shield them being picked up by TSA. Is there anything you can tell us about this, particularly with, we're now hearing from like the TSA Commission, or the Air Marshal Commission, some of these groups that represent these different forces are complaining that, hey, we got air marshals down the border checking for, lice and walking people to the bathroom. We need these guys back on airplanes. We're also hearing today, Congressman, that there's reports from NBC Channel 5 out of St. Louis that certain airports are across the country now are not going to be making people put their shoes up on the belt and scanning them, like we had the shoe bomber, and that this may go across the country. And yet these experts are warning this is not the right time, because if these guys are developing explosive devices that are invisible, we need to keep up our security, not be letting down our security. Is there anything you're hearing that you can speak to that wouldn't be classified?
No, it doesn't bother me what they're doing with the shoes. I mean, there's a feeling that all the security, some of it may be going overboard, obviously very costly, very intrusive. I do think in this administration, we are going to be focusing more at potential terrorism, just because of activity in the Middle East. And I think it's appropriate that we do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now, as this audience knows, I've been talking since we got back from the 4th of July break, since the 7th of July here. 2 years ago, the IRS's system was down to make our organization's payroll tax. And so we overnighted a check because 2 days it was down. After the second day, my CPA said, overnight that check so you're not getting penalized. So I did. And we got a letter saying, because you sent a check and didn't pay online, we're penalizing you $43,000. Now, it's not that we were late. They were penalizing us because we made the payment by check, not online. So we appealed it. They sent us an abatement letter and said, we're going to forgive that. 2 years later, they came back and said, we want, it was like $48,000, 47 something, almost 48,000. And we're like, wait a minute, you guys abated this 2 years ago. So it went through a review process and we got a second abatement. Then they came to us in 2025 and said, we want 49,000 something. We're like, you've abated this twice. And we went through appeal process. We got a really nice girl, to be honest with you, who was handling the appeal out of Milwaukee. She was an IRS agent. And she's like, this is crazy, Mr. House. You pay your taxes on time. There's no reason for this. The system was down for 2 days. You did what you could. You overnighted a check. She said, I can tell you the day we received your check. It's in the file, in your file. We know when we received your check. And yet you're being fined because you wrote a check. And you have your accountant, under the penalty of perjury, sign a statement saying that the system of the IRS was down for 2 days. Because I'd like to see if I could use all of this information to have this abated for a third and final time. So we got that to her. We worked with her for almost a month. Very professional, very much advocating, saying this is crazy, really, to be honest. And she called last week, right before the 4th, and said, I hate to tell you this, but my supervisor refuses to abate this for a third and final time. And I don't understand why, because I made a great case for why you shouldn't be charged this for writing a check when our system was down, particularly when you're a CPA signing under the threat of perjury that this was the reality. She said, but I have to tell you, Mr. House, you're going to have to pay the over $49,000 if you want to keep appealing, but you should keep appealing. So she had to actually help me walk through the process to fill out the form and pay it because the system's so archaic. We had to start guessing at what the IRS was asking us for. We finally got it done. With that being said, I think you're on one of the committees that oversees the IRS. Are you not? Because we're hearing from taxpayers and CPAs now across the country talking about their cases that are just as ridiculous. And it seems as though from my CPA to other CPAs we're talking to, that this has really increased, this problem, in the last 12 months. Now, I have my accountant, my CPA, my tax attorney, I have a CPA and a tax attorney, they think my case is political because my CPA says, in my 25 plus years, I've never seen the IRS abate something and change their mind 2 years later, much less abate it twice. She said, something's really going on weird with your case, and I think it's related to who you are and what you do. But there seems to be that maybe this has gotten worse, according to reports for other people too, because of so many IRS agents being added, they're trying to justify their existence. Are you on a committee or subcommittee that oversees the IRS?
Well, perhaps we can look at something like that, or the finance committee can look at something like that. We love to do it because you'll recall the IRS years ago did have problems with being political when it came from, which people got charitable treatment, feeling there was some politics involved there. We recently had a lot of new IRS agents hired. I can tell you many years ago, I dealt with the IRS as a lawyer, and sometimes the lack of common sense of there was just, I'm sure over time it probably hasn't gotten better. Particularly the Biden administration seems to, the federal government, other agencies of the federal government, FBI, that sort of thing, for political purposes. So I think it's definitely something we should look at, particularly with such rare treatment. It just happens to fall on Brandon House.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for that. Do you think we'll ever go to a national sales tax, get rid of this progressive system and go to a national sales tax, consumption tax?
No, we don't want to do that. Europe is a much poorer country than this country, and the reason is they have a much bigger government. In Europe, they will tax you, first of all, on your income, and then on a sales tax, a value-added tax. So they hit you twice, on income and sales. Maybe we should have done differently when we began the income tax in around 2015, 2014, but the fact remains at the time we decided to tax income. If we tax income and sales, you're just going to grow government and we'll wind up like it. So I'm against any sort of national sales tax. As a matter of fact, I'm worried when President Trump begins to say he's going to get a significant amount of money on the on tariff. Because tariffs is, of course, a form of sales tax. And that is one sure way to make our country poorer.
Wow. So you don't think there's a way to eliminate the progressive income tax and have a law written that says you can't have both? You can only have one?
No. I think if they ever go to a sales tax, what it will mean is they're adding a sales tax to the income tax.
Well, we can't have that, as you say.
We right now are borrowing 26% of our annual budget. I will tell you, if we put a national sales tax in there, they are not going to reduce the income tax. They will hit you twice.
Yeah, we can't have that. Can't have that, I agree. Well, let me try to end on some good news.
Okay.
Look at this one, the New York Times. The IRS says churches can endorse candidates from the pulpit. In a court filing, the tax agency said a decades-old ban on campaigning by tax-exempt groups should not apply to houses of worship speaking to their own members. All right, I agree with that. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. What are your thoughts on this, number one? And number two, you and I both like to talk about, rightfully so, the fact that we don't have a lot of shepherds and pastors speaking up about the issues of the day. Do you think that they'll find the courage to do so now, or are they still going to be afraid that they might offend somebody and still not speak up?
Well, actually, in my experience, I think your liberal churches have never been afraid to speak up. You know, at least in my district, I can think of examples. I don't have to call it the denominations, in which I think the ministers are kind of an embarrassment. They're not afraid to speak up. It's the conservative churches in which the ministers are afraid to speak up. Now, you don't want to be overly politically lose the flock, and the most important message concerns belief in Jesus Christ. Nevertheless, I do think our government overall today does things that can only be described as anti-Christian, and I think it's important for the clergy to call that out. Right? When you have school districts that are preaching LGBT stuff in elementary school, early elementary school, who's supposed to call out on that? Earlier today, we talked about the huge marriage penalties in our welfare system. Who's supposed to step up and say, it's time for the government to stop penalizing married couples? I think that these are the type of issues that the clergy should point out. I think they've been very quiet on some of these issues, including LGBT issues. And it's important for clergy, first of all, to familiarize themselves with the topic. Just don't, shoot from the hip. But when you familiarize yourself with the topic, educate the public on what behavior God expects from us.
Absolutely. So pastors need to speak up, and now they can't use the Johnson Amendment as the excuse. All right, folks, you need to follow my friend, Congressman Glenn Grothman on X, at Representative Grothman, at Rep Grothman, right there, 6th District of Wisconsin, a friend of the broadcast, spoke at our Worldview rally in Waukesha, Wisconsin in April. He's a favorite of our program, always makes himself available, and we love having him on the broadcast. So, as always, Congressman, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Brandon. Look to be back on the show in the near future again.
You can count on it. Thank you, sir. Congressman Glenn Grothman checking in, folks. Check out his website at Representative Grothman. And if you are one of his supporters in his district, and you see him, tell him, hey, we heard you on Brandon House Live. We love it when he hears that, right? Because we get great reports back from him on that. So let him know you appreciate him and encourage him. It's not an easy job. It's not, right? And we appreciate the good ones. You got to keep the good ones encouraged, folks. And this is a good one. We like Congressman Glenn Grothman. All right, before we go, folks, take a look at this. I'm thankful for this. They're praying today in the cabinet room. Thank you, President Trump. We don't have to agree on everything for us to appreciate the good things that President Trump is doing. There are many of them, and this is one of them. I love seeing our nation's leaders with their head bowed, praying, beseeching the Lord. That does me good. And that gentleman that's praying always prays every time I've heard him, a very biblical prayer. So pray for our elected leaders. Again, we don't always agree with everything that the administration's doing. They're doing a lot of things right, and they need wisdom, discernment. None of us are perfect. I'm not perfect. God's put them where they are. Let's pray for them. And by the way, pray for us. Will you do something else? Support us. WorldviewFoundation.com. We need your support now, please. WorldviewFoundation.com. So next time in Brandon House, may God save America. Take care.